Hello, welcome to our class on Matthew. We're continuing to go through the book of Matthew. This is we're in the fifth chapter of the book of Matthew. We've kind of looked at Matthew and its theme of the kingdom and how the kingdom is so important. We looked at several of the previous chapters about his birth and his early childhood, and his baptism, and how all that was pointed to this is the king. This is the kingdom. This is everything that has been prophesied from the prophets of old till now, and it is been prophesied so many times, and now we finally have the king. This is who he is. And then we kind of transition in chapter 5 with the Sermon on the Mount into who will be in this kingdom. Who are the people of the kingdom? What is this kingdom going to be like? And so that's what we're kind of looking into right now. This past Sunday, we kind of looked at the Beatitudes and the attitudes of the kingdom. And so that's what we're kind of going to continue. We talked about salt and light. And now we're going to move into the rest of the chapter 5, where it says that Christ came to fulfill the law, not to abolish the law, but came to fulfill it. And then he's going to start by doing 6, you've heard it said, but I say. And so we're going to kind of see that theme throughout it. I hope this video finds you well, you're doing well. This whole process is still kind of new to everyone. I know that everyone's trying to figure out. If you have any questions about how to access the videos, or if you need anything, just kind of let me know. Send me an email. If you're not getting an email, let me know and I'll add you to the list. I'm still trying to weed out what emails to use, which ones. So just let me know. And if you need anything, just kind of let me know and we'll do our best. But this section of scripture that we're going to look at, we have to kind of split it up because there's so much in here. The rest of chapter 5, 17 through the end of the chapter, that's verse 48, it kind of all goes together. So in the section that we're about to look in, 17 through 20, is kind of introduction. And then he's going to look at 6, you've heard it said, but I say. I'm calling his disciples to be higher or more righteous. But there's just so much in there. I can't do it in one lesson without it taking 40, 45 minutes. And I really want, kind of how I picture this, and my goal of mine is that you read the text, you kind of delve deep into it, you ask yourself some questions, you underline stuff that you have comments or questions about, or you think is important, and then you answer the questions that I've sent out on the worksheet. Which, if you need that and you haven't got that, let me know and I'll send that to you. Answer the questions, the worksheet, and then hopefully you can watch this video, and this would take about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and be a supplement to your study that you've already did. So without further ado, let's jump into it. This is kind of what we're about to see. It's going to be the righteousness of the Pharisees compared to the kingdom of heaven of righteousness. What Jesus is calling his disciples to be, and being higher. As you can tell, the left side, the Pharisee righteousness, is very outward. So we're going to see all these sections and all these different subjects are very outward for the Pharisees, but Jesus is calling his disciples to have an inward spirit of righteousness, not just to act righteous, but to be righteous. And it's really putting on legs on what he talked about in the Beatitudes. And if you have the Beatitudes, poor in spirit, pure in heart, all these Beatitudes that we looked at, then you will have what he talks about in each of these different subjects. And so it's really only giving examples and showing what a person must be if they are truly having all the Beatitudes, and they will truly be blessed. So we'll kind of go through these, and this is what we'll go through the next few classes. I want you to recognize what the end of this is going to be, because I think that's super important. The authority of Jesus, verse 28, this is chapter 7, 28, 29. When Jesus finished these sayings, the crowds were astonished at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one who had authority, not as their scribes. This is very important. This is how the crowds reacted at the end of his teaching. Because what he was saying was so revolutionary. They hadn't seen anything like it. They hadn't heard anything like it before. And this was the crowd's reaction, which is kind of understatement because no one had taught like this. No one had said these kinds of things before. And so I want to appreciate the revolutionary arguments and speaking that Jesus is saying at this time. So let's dive into it. Let's look at this first section. Verse 17. This kind of introduction to the rest of chapter 5. Verse 17, do not think that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota or nor a dot will pass away from the law until it is accomplished. Therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. So as you kind of see here, this is the introduction. And before he jumps into the specific examples that he's going to call his disciples, his followers to be, he wants to make something clear. And the thing that he wants to make clear is that he's not coming to abolish the law, but to actually fulfill it. Now, he has to make this abundantly clear because a lot of people would think, and probably some of the Pharisees would say, and, he's just trying to get rid of the law of Moses. He's just trying to get rid of all of that. He doesn't care about the law of Moses at all. And what Jesus is saying is, no, I deeply care, and that's why I'm going to fulfill it. I'm going to follow everything, not just the outward motions. I'm going to follow everything and to be the kind of person that God called the Israelites to be in the first place. And then he kind of follows up in verse 18, just to make an explanation on it, until truly I say to you, this is the first truly he makes in the book. These are the pointed emphasis. Until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota nor a dot will pass from the law until it's all accomplished. Nothing's going to pass away until the law is all accomplished. And really, that's through him. Through him, he accomplishes all the law. He does that in a couple of ways. One, he fulfills the whole law because he kept the whole law perfectly. He kept it perfectly. He didn't have anything that he was failing in. He didn't sin ever. And so he accomplished it. He accomplished the entire law. And two, he is the fulfillment of everything the law was predicting, that there would be this Messiah, this person who would take away this need for everything the law called for, and that there would be grace. You see this a lot in Romans, a lot in Galatians, of Paul kind of talking about this, that and especially in Romans chapter 7, where the law condemns a person because a person sins, and so the law condemns them. But Jesus brings this grace. And verse 19 just kind of tells them that he comes to teach all the commandments, not just the ones that are outward, but he comes to do all the commandments. And he is very straightforward in saying, anyone who teaches just some of these is the least in the kingdom, but those who teach all of them, they will have their place in the kingdom. They'll be called great. And then I think verse 20 would have been so surprising to the people in that day. For I tell you, unless the righteousness exceeds that of scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Now, I think I've said this before, but in our modern 21st century mindset of the scribes and Pharisees, we think they're these horrible people, these bad guys that no one liked. They're like the evil people, like they're Darth Vader as they come into the room. Because we have this full picture from Matthew and from Jesus and the woes that he gave the Pharisees. But that wasn't really the case if you were living that day. The scribes and the Pharisees would have been looked up to as the most spiritual people, the most righteous people. they went out of their way to proclaim their righteousness. The scribes had written every were so perfectionist that they would write every iota or dot, as in verse 18 says, that they would copy each individual punctuation or letter down to everyone. They would never make a mistake. If they made a mistake, they would scrap the whole thing. And so they were super careful to keep the whole old law. And then the Pharisees would go to great lengths to be righteous and to follow every law. But as we tell, really this whole sermon is against the Pharisees, is they only cared about the outward appearance. If people thought they were righteous, they were righteous. They felt like they'd done their duty. But Jesus is calling to inward righteousness too, and that is the point of this whole sermon. Is you can't just be outwardly righteous; you have to be inwardly righteous, and that's really that's good for anyone in any day and age. If we were to apply this to ourselves today, it'd be like if Jesus said, "You have to be better than the elders or the preacher." For you, or you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Or maybe for some in the denominational world, if he said, Jesus came and said, your righteousness has to exceed that of Billy Graham, because people look up to Billy Graham as this, amazing figure, which is true. But like, your righteousness does have to exceed that of Billy Graham. And so like that would just forward so many people if you were to say that. And that's kind of what these crowds would have went through at that time too. They would just been floored that their righteousness would had to exceed that of the scribes and Pharisees. And the first subject that he goes to is the subject of anger and murder. And it's the first of 6 subjects in which he starts with, "You've heard it was said of those of old." And so it's the first of those 6, and he's really hammering at the Pharisees, because this is kind of the teaching they had. And so let me read this and then we'll get into it. Verse 21, "You've heard it was said of those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to the judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says, 'You fool,' will be liable to the hell of fire. So if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you be put in prison. Truly I say to you, you will never get out until you pay the last penny." So this first subject is the subject of anger and murder. And it sounds like he is kind of, especially with these first few subjects, it kind of sounds like he's going down the order of the 10 Commandments. Do not murder is, of course, the 6th commandment. We're going to get to adultery, which is the 7th commandment. It kind of sounds like he's just going down there. But as you kind of see, it kind of falls off of that. So this is why I think he's actually picking up some of the sayings that were very popular with the Pharisees and the scribes, and he's saying, they say don't murder, but I say I hold you to a higher standard. I hold you to a higher standard of measurement. It isn't enough just to avoid the actual action of murdering. You have to get all the anger out of your heart, out of your mind, and out of your soul. You have to get any attention to do such a thing out of you. And really, that is a difficult command. I think all of us at one point or another has struggled with anger. We've been with someone that just gets on our everlasting nerve. We find, driving is one of those things that seems to bring out anger in people, whatever that is. And some people struggle with it more than others. But anger is something that we all at one time have dealt with, and we've all probably lost our cool at one time or another. And this command of, get anger out of your life. Don't be angry with your brother. Don't never insult your brother. That is something that is a difficult command. And he's really holding his disciples to a very high command. And then you follow that up with verse 23. So you're not only not supposed to have anger with your brother, you're not supposed to be insult your brother or call him a bad name. But in verse 23, it says that if you're offering a gift at the altar and there remember that brother has something against you, and this is very important. It's not that you have something against your brother, it's that the brother has something against you. So it may not even be justified. But if your brother has something against you, there's an argument, you have the duty, you have the resolve to try to make that right, to go beyond, go above and beyond, offer a hand of peace and reconciliation to try to make things right with your brother. And this just takes it one step further, where you're not just not becoming angry with your brother, but you're trying to make peace with your brother. And that it's so important, and he emphasizes this, it's so important that comes before you worship God. You have to be at peace with your brother before you can be at peace with God. And then people always kind of say, well, what if your brother doesn't say yes? Or what if the brother says, I want nothing to do with you, and curses you or whatever? You've done your duty. You've done the same thing that God has done with the world. He's reached out a hand. He's offered peace. And if they don't accept it, that's their problem. That's on their hand. That's on their head. But you've done what you can do. And that's all that you can do sometimes is just hold out your hand. Try to offer peace. And you never know. There's times where you will think that person would never receive my hand of peace. That person would just hate me or spit in my face. But you offer that hand of peace and they just start crying and they say, yeah, you really hurt me and I can't believe you did that. But so grateful that you asked if there's any way you can make it right. And you never know. And that's kind of what Jesus is calling his people to be, those people who are really acting out the beatitude of peacemakers. And it's really, again, this is putting feet on the beatitudes. Have the attitude of the beatitudes, and you will do all of these other areas very right. And then verse 25, I think, and 26, he's just making a simple analogy, parable, that if you're waiting to meet the judge at the end of time and get your last 2 cents and say, well, this brother did this to me, it may not go as well for you as you hope. You need to make peace. You need to make a plea bargain deal, as the analogy goes, before you can, before he takes you to court, because it may not go as well for you as you hope for. And so this is kind of anger and murder. Don't just be satisfied by not doing the act. Be so pure in your heart and be such a peacemaker that there is no anger in you, that you would not even think to call someone a fool because you have pity and compassion upon him, and that you would reach out your hand to try to do all that you can to help someone to reconcile and amend your relationship. So that is kind of the first one. Now the second one is the seventh command with adultery and lust. Verse 27, you've heard it said that you should not commit adultery, but I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with a lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. If your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than your whole body um, go into hell. And so you really see that, um, again, it is not enough that you don't do adultery, that you don't commit the act of adultery, that you don't commit that act. You also don't need any um, mental lust or sinful actions or sinful thoughts in your mind. Now, um, sexual desire in and of itself is not a bad thing. God made us with sexual desire. But when it is carried out and thought of and satisfied with someone else's wife or husband, someone else other than your wife or husband, that's where it's sin. You're lusting after something that is not yours. And that's where it is wrong and it is very sinful. And so he is again calling his disciples to a higher state of righteousness than the average person, even the average spiritual person, Pharisee in that day would call himself to. You can't just commit the outward act. You also have to clean your mind, become pure, become good inside. That way you can be pure throughout. And he takes it to such an extreme in verse 29. If your right eye causes you sin, tear it out and throw it away, for it's better you to lose one of your members than the whole body be thrown into hell. Now, does he literally mean if you are sinning with your eyes to just tear it out and throw it away? No, I do not believe so. Because, I mean, if you are sinning with your right eye, I mean, if you tear that out, what makes you not sin with your left eye? And then there's also no place in the Bible where mutilation has been a positive, a good thing, something that is good to do. Um, it is never something that is condoned, it is always condemned in the Old or New Testament. So this is not a literal command. But what Jesus is emphasizing here is the extremes that you should go to get sin out of your life, to cleanse your mind, to become pure. These are the lengths you should go to. Now, if you would make this a modern example, let's say that you're struggling with lust, maybe pornography on the computer, and that is something that is very hard for you and that you have a lot of trouble with, maybe go to such lengths that you take all electronics and Wi-Fi and everything out of your house. Now, to a lot of people, that would be literally tearing off your right eye or your right hand and throwing that away, cutting it off. But Jesus is saying, go to such lengths to have sin, to remove sin from your life, that you need to go as far as you need to get sin out of your life. And that is what you need to do. For it is better for you to lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. It's better for you to go through this whole life without internet than to go in hell in the afterlife. It is better for you to go this whole life without whatever that is than to you to go in hell for all eternity. And he's just emphasizing the enormous importance of devoting your whole life to being pure, to being inwardly righteous, not the outwardly righteous. And that's something that a lot of people, me, the elders, other people in church won't know about. That's something that most people won't know about. We don't know if you are thinking lustful thoughts or anger thoughts or whatever thoughts. We can only see the outward actions. That is something that each Christian needs to look in their life and see if they're having pure and righteous thoughts or not. The United States government is not going to prosecute you for having murderous thoughts or sexual thoughts. But the kingdom of God expects you to have pure thoughts, to have righteous thoughts, to care about your brother, to care about your sister, to not be angry, to not lust. And then he goes into this divorce which is kind of tied a little bit to the previous section. And verse 31, it is also said that whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Now, the back in that day, in the first century, Jews thought that you can divorce your wife for whatever reason. A man can divorce his wife for whatever reason, as long as he gives her a certificate of divorce. As long as he signs the certificate of divorce, he's free. He's good to go. Now, originally Moses put that into the law to protect the woman, so that the man couldn't say the man that the man didn't just kick her out and say, I divorce you with no proof whatsoever, and then she goes and remarries another man, and then he says, well, you're committing adultery. That was the original reason that was put into place, is to actually protect the woman from false accusation. But they had taken it so far that they could divorce for any reason whatsoever, as long as they provide a certificate, which is complete contrary to what God's idea for marriages and God's idea for the relationship a man and a woman should have. But they had taken that totally out of context. And he says here that if you divorce your wife, except for the grounds of sexuality, you make her commit adultery. Especially in that day when women didn't have as option many times of making money, and so they relied on the support of men. And so you would tempt your wife to go and marry another, committing adultery, just to live, just to support themselves. And then the opposite of that, whoever marries a divorced woman, so if you married someone that was divorced for not rightful cause, you committed adultery. And so it's not that you can't, as long as you give certificate of divorce, you can go and sleep with this woman and marry this woman that you lusted after. That's why I think these two things are tied to each other, because I think what people were doing was they would say, don't commit adultery, but if you really want someone, if you're lusting after someone, you can give your wife a certificate of divorce, marry this person you're lusting after for, and then it's all good. You haven't committed adultery. And Jesus said that is totally wrong. And again, you're trying to make the rules fit where you're still good, and totally ignore the principle, the letter of the law and what it's trying to get at. He's calling his disciples to be better and to be more righteous. Again, this is something which our government, other governments will not prosecute you on if you do this. But he is holding to be a citizen of the kingdom of God, to be a kingdom citizen. You have to be held to a higher standard. You have to be held into the standard of God, in which you have all the Beatitudes, which you are loving and you're kind enough that you don't get mad and you don't get angry with your brother. You still love them, and you don't take your neighbor's wife or your neighbor's husband or disrespect your own wife or husband that way. You work on your relationship. You make your relationship with your wife or husband strong. You love them, as Ephesians says, as Christ loved the church. And that's what we're supposed to do with each other. So this is the standard in which Jesus is calling his disciples to be. This is just the first half. We'll get into the second half of these Sunday. And really what I want you to do, as I think one of the last questions on your sheet says, is which one of these do you struggle with the most? Which one of these do you struggle with the most? Anger, lust, oaths, retaliation, loving your enemies. Which one of these do you struggle with the most? And what I want you to do this week and next week is work on it. How can you get better? How can you get better in those things? How you become more pure and loving? how you can be called to the calling that God and Jesus has called you to be part of the kingdom. And that is what really Matthew is all about. So hope that you will join me Sunday as we go through the rest of these. You've heard it said, and Jesus says, but I say, welcome to the kingdom. This is how you're supposed to act. So I hope you're doing well. Let me, if you have any suggestions or anything, let me know. And I hope you have a good rest of the week. Yeah, have a good time, and I will hopefully see you soon.